Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for being here. This is a super cool venue. No pressure or anything, but literal rock stars have been on the
I
stage.
see bar straight back.
There is a bar, so does that make you a little more relaxed?
Already.
Things get tough. What I want to do is talk with Jim. Obviously, the focus today, tech and nonprofits, which I think you and I both agree are intersecting in a way that we've hoped to see for some time. You know, I've talked with Benetech before. It's a fascinating company doing some wonderful things, but I don't want to take up all of Jim's time. At a certain point, I do want to open it up to questions. So after maybe 10 minutes or so or whatever, I'll look out, and if anyone has a question, we have mics. Feel free to ask, because maybe Jim is even hiring. You never know.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Jim, they call you the Godfather of this type of thing, and I realize that may be But all that means in this sense, and the tech industry is still relatively young, and the tech industry being super wealthy and super sexy and super successful is even younger than that. You started Benetech at a time when there were a lot of sexy startups out there, and the thing to do was make money and help yourself and get those stock options. And I'm curious, because we're going to see some companies, you know, Box and Twilio, who have things set aside for nonprofits. And I'll ask you about that. But what was it like making that jump when all the cool people, besides you, were starting companies and sort of focusing on the successful companies, and you were saying, what? I want to help other people.
Well, you know, I mean, I started 7 for-profit tech companies in the 80s in Silicon Valley, and only 5 failed.
That's not a bad.
But this idea of this first company, you know, not only did it have all these commercial applications, which is why our venture capitalists invested, but it could also help people with disabilities. And so I carried that through, you know, 7 years of getting this company going. And at one point, we just said, let's build this product, and we showed it to our board. And they vetoed it because, you know, they said, how big's the market for reading machines for the blind? And I said, $1 million a year. And they went, you know, so great business decision not to do it, but terrible social decision. And I just decided to, you know, instead of buying the line that we're only here to make money, which is, you know, what your investors tell you when they give you $25 million in your company, I still wanted to do it. And then I think I figured out a couple things. One is no one got why I would start a nonprofit, but the idea that I would start a for-profit that in $1 million a year market was inconceivable, right? You know, so my lawyer said, well, you could start a deliberately nonprofit tech company, and I giggled because our tech company was accidentally nonprofit, like so many other for-profit tech companies, and so like, oh, we'll be successful by definition. But still, I had friends who didn't get it. They're like, oh, you're gonna grow this thing up, and then you're gonna sell it, and you're gonna pocket the money. And I was like, I'd go to jail because a nonprofit is a charity. That money belongs to the taxpayer. But I think on the good side, people in Silicon Valley want to help. They're very proud of what they've done. They're frustrated that the business model stops them from helping, frankly, 95% of humanity. And if you give them away, we'll license your crown jewels for free so that we can go off and help people in Malawi or help kids with disabilities, they say yes more than 80% of the time. But nonprofit and tech, what didn't make so much sense, but they would say yes once they understood that's what I was talking about.
So you had to sort of bridge a gap between, because, you know, your business model, while sounding wonderful on one way, is not going to do well on Sand Hill Road. It's not going to get a whole lot of investment. But when you reached out to the tech companies, were they receptive and were they willing to help?
They totally were. I mean, my venture investors vetoed the project because they thought it would distract the management team from making a lot of money. And that was not a bad analysis. But when I said, I quit, and they said, oh my God, the founder's quit, he'll compete with us, he'll hire away all our staff. I said, I'll make you a deal. Let me start a nonprofit, give me an 80% discount on your product, and 60 days credit. And they said, okay. And HP said, sure, we'll give you deep discount and 60 days credit, and another vendor gave me similar deals. Suddenly, I was able to finance the start of my first social enterprise, even though I didn't know that's what you called it at the time, on money essentially lent to me by tech companies with their technology, and they were delighted that I was doing it as long as I wasn't distracting their team from making the lot of money that they were there for.
Does it blow your mind now that all these years later, almost the first thing any sort of startup in that field, the first thing a nonprofit does is how do we solve the technology problem? How do we get our word out? How do we fundraise? How do we sell? It all has to have technology and these partnerships.
Yeah, it does, except for they're usually 5 to 10 years behind the times. So, but other than that, it's great.
The nonprofits or the tech companies?
The nonprofits.
Okay.
I mean, I really feel like I'm in a time machine when I go talk to nonprofits about this. And that makes it easy to look like you're really smart, because if you know what's going on in Silicon Valley,
And you can predict the future.
you can
5
predict
years
the
ahead.
future, right? And I think that's a lot of what the people in this field do is they see an Uber or an Airbnb or some magical technology. They go, oh, how could I use that business model, that technology, that breakthrough to actually help these people that they'll never get to, or they'll get to at the very after they get to a whole bunch of other people.
So maybe that's not the first thing to ask.
I mean, I think every nonprofit that operates in this century needs to be thinking about using all the tools that make for-profits so effective. But I mean, frankly, a lot of nonprofits still operate 800 number call-in centers.
Right.
What business interacts solely with their people by telephone? I mean, most of the people you want to help don't use a telephone anymore, right? Anyway, these opportunities are out there all over the place, and I think that's why the movement's so important, is they're just, in many cases, lying there waiting to be picked up by a tech-savvy nonprofit that's going to bring that to the disadvantaged community or to the nonprofits that serve that community.
Okay, and while we're talking to the CEO of a tech-savvy nonprofit, how do you choose what products to put out there? Is it more of an internal decision, or do you look out and say, here's where the need is? I mean...
Well, if you took everything about Silicon Valley and twisted it for social good, that's what we do, right? So it's not 10x return to investors, it's 10x return to society. Is it 10 times cheaper? Is it going to revolutionize a field? What are the exit options? What's the go-to-market strategy? What's the value proposition to the customer?
Those are very tech-savvy terms.
Yeah,
okay.
but I mean, we think of that way, but if you actually think about it in another way, it's actually treating the community that we're serving with the respect that a tech company treats their customers with, right?
That makes sense.
As opposed to delivering charity, we're delivering tools to help you take yourself out of poverty, or advocate for human rights, or get justice, or go to school, or whatever it is that you want. So there's just, I think I'm still thinking like a tech entrepreneur, but I get to work on the most important problems you can imagine, and with far fewer competitors.
Now, you mentioned entrepreneurs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs out here today. And a lot of them are in the early stages of what they're doing, of their startups. What's the advice as far as, I don't know if crossing the chasm is even the right word here, but to take that next step, to think like a tech company, but act like a nonprofit and serve the nonprofit world?
So this is the weird thing, is that Silicon Valley is a favor trading network. And I don't think people really get that. But when I was a budding young entrepreneur, the CEOs of companies that were 5 years further along would help me. Now, they were doing it as a favor to their investors. They were betting me and my co-founders, but it's a favor trading network. People want you to succeed. People want to be attached to the group that's going to go somewhere, because there's ways to make money off of that. But it's a thrill to work with new entrepreneurs and new ideas. For many of us, that's the most fun thing we can imagine. When I went in the nonprofit sector, I went like solo for 10 years. And it was lonely, because they were like, you're running a nonprofit. Right. But I think the whole thing about this movement, whether it's gathering of social entrepreneurs or the first ever Tech for Good conference like this, you have so much to learn from your peers. As an entrepreneur, I learn far more from my peers than either of my investors. I mean, it really, you can actually go to someone and say, how do I hire a chief financial officer? How do I run a market campaign? How do I convince X foundation to give me money? Whatever the question is, your peers are more likely to have the best intelligence. And if you are an active member of that favor trading network, we call it karma banking at Benetech, Make 5 times the deposits you can possibly imagine doing withdrawals, and things will work out.
Well, and like every tech, someone looking for a tech job, they say it always comes down to contacts, and it sounds like that's what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
Contacts are very important. What have you noticed, because you said the first 10 years were lonely, what have you noticed, let's say, in the last 5 years in terms of the relationship between tech and nonprofits, and how much of that, I'm curious, is related to the fact that the economy is good, stock prices are high, and do they take your calls more often, in other words, when the stock price is high and there's a lot of money, and does that change? Did it change back in 2008, let's say, when things were hurting?
I think that the economy is a weak link in this chain. There's a couple things have happened. One is the tech community has become aware of its social responsibility. During the dot-com bubble, no one was thinking about society. And the few people who made big nonprofit bets and then had their companies go away were a little disappointed that they couldn't follow through on their promises. But the dot-com bubble popping, that was the seminal event for the tech community. Globalization, 9/11, all these big shifts have meant that the new generation of tech companies actually take social good seriously, right? And you actually see this. So the tech community is there. The real sea change I've noticed is in the last 5 years, the nonprofit, non-technical people have shifted, right? So imagine, I often talk, we do a lot of work in civil rights and human rights, and 5 years ago, the average head of an organization didn't want to talk about tech, didn't want to talk about security, any of those kinds of things, because they had gone into this field to get away from technology. And now, they're under massive pressure. They're pressure from donors, demonstrate impact. You need data, you need some kind of software to help you do that. And they have pressure from their teams. Collecting data on paper? Are you kidding me?
Right.
I've got this thing in my pocket. So now we're getting the phone calls like you wouldn't imagine. Of course, the last 2 months, we're getting a lot more phone calls. Can't imagine what else has happened in the environment that has caused that to happen. But I just think that the entire nonprofit sector is aware that they have to get smarter. They may have to solve problems with half as much money if the current administration proposals kind of go through in some areas. I can't imagine a future where it's not going to be software and data is going to be a key piece of solving all the major problems that we're in, whether they're longstanding or newly constructed.
Since you brought it up, the last couple of months, and I know you spent some time in D.C., so last month in airports from New York to just down here at SFO, you had ACLU lawyers, nonprofit lawyers, you had people just showing up, donating their time to help people get off these planes, stay in the country or get in the country. And what did they need? They needed technology. You saw social media in use, you saw I don't even know.
Collaboration, probably not with a lot of attention to actual confidentiality of key information.
Right.
I think that more and more nonprofits are getting that they serve vulnerable people and they collect information about what makes them vulnerable. And we now see threat models where people want a list of all of the DACA kids and want a list of all the illegal immigrants.
And maybe their social media contacts.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're now entering into a pretty crazy period. And the good news is that there's a huge outpouring of people who want to help, but we, as the Tech for Good movement, need to rise to that occasion and give them better tools to help in a way that protects privacy and makes their volunteer service actually effective. And what that means is we don't actually have the time that we used to have to respond to some of these things. So that means a lot more of the rapid prototyping and quick stuff to find the things that are actually going to have long-term value. And that's a lot of our model, right? We're going to try 10 things, and the one that catches fire is probably the next social enterprise for us.
I want to open it up to Q&A and that sort of thing. But given the rapid pace now, I mean, what would you have done differently when you started? I mean, is there anything you sort of wish in a time machine that you could have done differently when it comes to tech or
it turned out that there were a lot more people like me operating at the same time in a vacuum, and we didn't know about each other. So, I just, I remember that the first time that someone got a group of social entrepreneurs together, it was amazing, because very few of them were tech for good people, but they were people who could talk about business concepts and social justice at the same time, and their heads didn't explode. I felt a lot more at home with that social worker who had gotten an MBA than I did with a lot of my friends in Silicon Valley who are still worrying about how to make their, second 10 million.
Right, they might have been vesting.
Yeah. So I think it takes a community, and it not only takes a community of we who are working on this, but I think a lot of the shift is we actually are treating the people that we're serving with a lot more respect. That's actually what the tech field does, right? We give tools to the people on the edges, but a lot of the tech field thinks that the edges are the 5% richest people on the planet. We got to go out to the real edges, whether that's immigrants in this country or refugees or people with disabilities or women who are experiencing violence. Those are the people that we really need to be serving. And I don't know, I think the tech field wants to see that happen, and I know we collectively want to see that happen.
Yeah, some of the stats of how most people are connected 80-90% to the internet, but there are some people who still are not, even in big cities like this.
Yeah, and we take cell phone, internet, social media. Right. Yeah, those have some pretty pervasive applications. But once you get beyond those outliers, and they're big ones.
Right.
A lot of the benefits of what we take for granted. ordering pizza more effectively online is not something that I hear a lot about from Malawians, right? So they'll get there. It's our job is to get them there faster.
What I want to do while we have some time is open it up for any questions for Jim, and if anyone, feel free. It's a pretty intimate space, but I think we even have microphones. But if anyone has a question or perhaps a sales pitch, that would be a good time.
Or a comment? Yeah.
All right, well, if not, that's okay.
All right, we've got more questions, but still.
You know, I'm curious. Remember how, and this goes back a ways, obviously, but HP, this goes back a long ways before our time, but HP, when they went public, decided we're going to set some equity aside for a foundation. And that proved to be an incredible thing. I remember more modern times, eBay did the same without knowing how much money that would be. It turned out to be a tremendous amount. I think Google did it with google.org. We're going to meet some people from Twilio.org, Box.org. That's an interesting trend. Is that a way that you can still focus on your bottom line and your stock price and yet know that as that does well, your charitable part does well?
I think I'm delighted you brought that up, because effectively my organization has been a beneficiary of just about all those groups, right?
Okay.
And HP is a great example, right? And of course, their scanner division did a direct deal with us at a deep discount, which they weren't permitted to do under their distribution strategy. And it was 5 years before the distribution divisions found out that they had done a direct deal with us.
It is a big company.
It is. So I mean, I think that kind of gets to the point is people want to see their stuff go well. And so we went from whether it's HP being open to do charity or setting up a foundation to eBay. I mean, Jeff Skoll and Piero Midyar were our two biggest funders when we really went through our giant growth phase. And I think that the coolest thing about technology is the marginal cost to give your technology to someone for free for most for-profits is nearly nothing, right? I mean, we get $500,000 of free advertising from Google, and does that have hard costs to them? No. But it's immensely valuable to us, and it's immensely valuable. So I think that whether it's the 1-1-1 kind of plans that Salesforce and other groups have started to do, 1% of equity, 1% of income, 1% of the employee time. There's just all this great stuff going on, and frankly, one of our newest social enterprises is Code Alliance, which is tech volunteers volunteering to do software for good. It's because we have 10 times more volunteers than we can use. That sounds like a social enterprise to me. And so we actually end up mapping those volunteers to these other places. So I think, and here's the hard business reason people do it, is in tech, in this boom, there's an incredible pool of talent that is not big enough for all the people who want to hire them. And if you look like you're doing a crappy job for society, people don't want to work for you. And I think that has come so clearly in focus. And it's why, Google.org, has actually been a key part of, and Google does whatever it is, 15 or 20 things. We probably get 10 different ways that Google helps us out. And I think one of the keys I want to just mention to you people is if you're not aware of what these guys can do for you, you should dig into it, because if you're paying list for software or even hardware, there's probably a better way if you're a bona fide 501c3 doing social good with tech.
And what if you are a small startup in terms of a nonprofit right now trying to do something good? What is more valuable, a $100,000 donation or all the goods and services, maybe even advertising, scanners that you need and can tangibly use? Or is that a silly question to ask?
Yeah.
Okay.
Take the money.
Okay.
Take the money. I mean, the thing is that free is expensive.
Okay.
Right? I mean, volunteers take management time and bandwidth. It could be that you spend $10,000 of staff time to get $30,000 worth of volunteer benefit. Okay, that's a good bargain. But if you don't have the $10,000 to pay your staff, and volunteerism, which is effectively what a lot of founders do during the early days, eventually you have to actually make not the living you'd make in Silicon Valley, but make some kind of living so you can survive, right? And so money is the drumbeat of that. And I think that one of the challenges of being in the tech for good space is that we're almost always one step removed from the social good, right? We're not delivering the bag of rice to a refugee. We're the people who make the logistics work better. We're not the person who's doing victim services to a victim of violence. We're the people who are trying to make sure that we don't lose their story, we don't actually leak it to the bad guys, and that we use that data to actually advocate for policy change at the national level. That's a tough case to make. And so, and nonprofits in general have been in such a culture of poverty they don't think they can afford any technology, and often don't make good investments. And so, I have these conversations with people who say, I've been told I should use Salesforce. And I'm like, okay. And they say, it's free, right? And I'm like, oh, you may think it's free. It's going to cost you, you're going to have to spend $50,000 to $100,000 a year on a staff person who gets Salesforce, not even full-time. You're going to have to pay for customization if it goes to scale. But it's still, for that problem, it's the best solution out there. And people don't often get that because they go, but why should I pay anything for this? And it's like, because it'll make all of your staff 20% more effective, which will save you, if you're a $1 million a year, kind of organizations, $200,000 that you don't have. And that math is still a hard thing for people to get. And one of the things I think the Tech for Good space doesn't do a good enough job is telling that story so that donors actually get why this is not overhead, why this is essential to actually delivering the social good we're trying to do.
All right, we're about to wrap up. Is there one bit of advice, one thing right now for everyone, assuming that we're sort of getting started in this, that you'd launch them with?
Well, it's the same advice I give to any for-profit entrepreneur, right? Is get in there with your customer, your user, your beneficiary, your stakeholder, whatever label you like. Understand what they're doing. There are no defective customers in the business world. There are no defective people in the nonprofit world. We have to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and if we can actually give them something that helps tip the balance in what they want to accomplish with their lives, that's our job. So go out there, really understand it, and deliver some value to them.
Jim, thank you.
Scott?
Jim Fruchterman, everybody
All right.
from Benetech.
All right. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Hey, good.